Amir, it's good to see you, man. I'm glad you're back here on the stage with me. I enjoy these annual nuclear catch-ups that we've been having for the last couple of years. Donald Trump takes the oath for the second time. And there's a lot of conversation about the impact he's going to have. And normally, I would say, as I said earlier today, I don't put a lot of weight on who the president is. I think the beauty of the American Constitution is that it limits the power of any one man. But there's times in history where that's different. This might be one. Amir, what's your take? What is the weight of the Trump impact?
Well, look, Trump is taking over, but I tell you, the one thing that can't come fast enough here in Canada is our next federal election. I mean, honestly, I can't think of a more selfish person than the current prime minister. I didn't want to get into politics, but this is actually so upsetting that Trump is coming in with the mandate, and we're still trying to figure out who's going to lead this country, and that's a big problem. By either show of hand or applause, tell me if you're rooting for, let's say, Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney, I guess. Let's say he wins the Liberal race. All right, this was a good poll. We should let them know. Listen, Trump is coming in at a time where his pick for Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, tells you everything you need to know about the attitude towards energy with this administration coming in. Chris Wright is an oil and gas executive who happens to be on the board of a small modular reactor company, Oklo. And so we have a situation where, because of power demand growth in the US, there is an everything is needed mentality and approach to energy in the US. And so as a result, I think whether we call it American energy dominance or some of these terms Trump is going to give it, drill baby drill, as he likes to say. It's funny, if you talk to executives in Midland, Texas, for example, they say, geez, we don't want to drill anymore. The gas and oil markets are oversupplied. But the reality is, when Trump says drill baby drill, what he really means is energy, energy, energy. And that could not be better captured in the trends we're seeing with technology companies. Technology companies have gone from being incredibly high growth businesses that just had these incredible operating margins to now becoming almost CapEx investment plays, because in order to keep up with the energy needs of AI, we're going to need a lot more energy. And so just quickly here, how many people here use any of the new AI systems like, let's say, ChatGPT? Okay, so let's say with ChatGPT, when I do a single ChatGPT query, just to give context, that utilizes 100 times more energy than a simple Google search. 100 times more. And so when you look at power demand growth in the US for the last 20 years, it was basically flat. And now when you look at power demand growth in the US, just to the end of this decade, the next 5 years, it's 10% annualized growth. And that growth is coming from the tech sector. The richest companies on the planet with the largest amount of free cash flow that have nothing but interest to see energy infrastructure grow are going to be investing in energy. And I think the Trump presidency coming in recognizes that and will unleash hell in a good way to make sure they get what they need.
And you're seeing this trend. Okay, so recently Microsoft announced they're purchasing effectively 3 Mile Island, the nuclear power facility, and I believe the agreement entitles them to 100% of the power that this plant produces. Amazon has made investments in nuclear. Meta is trying to. Google is trying to right now. So if I've got that right, Amir, I mean, these are 4 of the biggest companies in the world. They're all trying to finance their own energy sources, and they've all chosen the same thing. I'd love you to add some context to that.
So think about it like this. Microsoft basically went to the public utilities in the country and said we need gigawatts of power by 2027. By context, a couple of gigawatts of power is, for example, what the city of Austin needs in energy. So the utilities turned around and said, we can't supply that in that kind of time frame. So what Microsoft and others are doing, the Magnificent Seven as they call them, they're going behind the grid. They're basically going directly to the utility companies, in that case Constellation, that had retired a reactor, 3 Mile Island Unit 1. And remember, 3 Mile Island was the site of a nuclear disaster in the US over 30 years ago. And basically told Constellation, we'll give you a couple of $1 billion and a 50% premium to the prevailing market rate for you to turn that plant on. We'd like you to operate it for 20 years and we'll buy all the power you're going to generate for the next 20 years. That's the kind of demand, those are the kind of numbers, that's the kind of math that we're talking about. And so when you think about this for a second, right? What is also making Microsoft go towards nuclear power? What is making Amazon and Google and all these guys go towards nuclear power? Uranium is the most energy-dense commodity that we have, that we know of, okay? And when you think about what oil and gas is, right? Oil and gas is about turning molecules into electrons. And nuclear power is about converting atoms into electrons. What's the difference? The difference is that 1 pound of uranium, follow me on this, 1 pound of uranium generates the same amount of energy as 3,000 barrels of oil. So when you think about the fact that these big tech companies are thinking about what kind of power they can use that's going to have the energy density, it's going to use less land space, it's going to need less transportation, doesn't need to involve geopolitically unstable regions. They're really coming to this hard conclusion. And I think, Jay, anyone here who's a uranium investor would remember Friday, March 11, 2011. That was the Fukushima incident. We kind of know that because that was a difficult moment for the industry. But you should always remember Friday, September 20th, 2024. That was the day Microsoft announced that they were going to restart 3 Mile Island. And the most powerful symbol of the rebirth of nuclear energy is that date and it's that transaction and everything that has followed really since then.
I just want to make sure I got those numbers accurate. 1 pound of uranium produces the equivalent, the energy equivalent of 3,000 barrels
of oil.
Oil. I like how that's full circle from this morning's conversation. We were discussing the Industrial Revolution and how 1 gallon of gasoline provided the energy equivalent of 400 human labor hours, allowing mechanical engines to take over the world. It's a similar moment. The theme of this morning's talk was that we only shift when the new thing becomes more cost-effective than the current thing. And when I saw these tech titans investing in the nuclear sector so aggressively, like 2 things came to mind. The first was, they're going nuclear. They're not going solar. They're not going geothermal. They're not going wind. They're going nuclear, and all of them are. And that was curious to me. And secondly, I also wondered how much of those investments were based in them looking at the current American grid and just saying, there's no way this is going to keep up. We need to take matters into our own hands. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, that's exactly it. But I mean, again, I do believe that they're going to take all this, any energy they can get, they're going to take. Because again, we went from flat growth for 20 years to now doubling over the next 15 years, 10% growth to the end of the decade. That's a marked step change, all right? The second thing is that we're all concerned about how much land mass it takes to create energy. 1 nuclear reactor that can generate 1 gigawatts of power, to go to renewable for a second, to create the alternative of that, you would need 3,000 wind turbines. You would need, instead of 1 square mile of land, you would need 10,000 square mile of land. So again, there are issues here. The biggest other thing you need to understand is, here's a cup of coffee, right? There's a cup of coffee that might look like brown water, and then there's a cup of coffee that'll be really nice and strong. When you think about electricity, that quality is measured in hertz. So if you have a situation where you have a data center with very expensive equipment for processing data, you need high quality electricity, which means high hertz, which means uninterrupted power. Problem with renewables is that it's intermittent, which means it works 25 to 30% of the time. So it can basically burn out the equipment. Nuclear is the highest quality of electricity that we can also generate. So for data centers, and data center demand is really everything. I mean, I can't tell you enough about the importance of understanding what the development in data centers is doing to energy demand. But those guys need high quality, reliable, base load, around the clock, works 95% of the time type of electricity. So not the brown water coffee, but nice, strong, triple shot espresso kind of thing, you know?
All right, so
speaking of that coffee, I got a drink here.
I want to ask you next, Amir, about what's changed in the nuclear technology sector, because we had a nuclear dawn before, and in 1954, the United States Secretary of Commerce, Lewis Strauss, predicted that eventually we would go 100% nuclear powered and energy would become too cheap to meter. And obviously we didn't get there. I think nuclear produces about 9% of energy in the world today. But that was a long time ago, right? And a lot's changed and technology has evolved. So what is the difference in today's nuclear dawn versus what we've seen in the past?
Okay, the biggest difference is the United States, okay? So what do I mean by that? The 20 years that I've been in this business, if you asked me on stage or anywhere, Amir, where is the growth in nuclear power? The answer was China and India. It was an emerging market story. And it still very much is. China is going to build 150 reactors over the next 15 years. But the biggest difference today versus the last 20 years is that the US, the biggest economy in the world, with its biggest corporate champions, have decided we're going to not double, triple nuclear power generation by 2050. They made that pledge a few months ago at COP29. They made it at COP28. So now you have, for the first time, not only a pledge to significantly expand nuclear capacity from the world's largest economy, but you actually have an unbelievable thing, bipartisan support. Can you show me another topic that in Washington, D.C., Democrats and Republicans can agree on? And nuclear happens to be one of them. And it used to be that nuclear was really taboo, it was hated, it was out of favor. But once you got guys like Bill Gates and Sam Altman and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos really put their pocketbook and their checkbook behind nuclear, well, Washington, D.C. has followed, the policies have come in, and now that, to me, is the biggest difference, that this is no longer an emerging market story, but it's one where the growth is driven by the US and by its biggest corporate champions.
Yeah, and the strategic value of capturing that, right? Because energy is the universal input. It doesn't matter if you're wearing it, eating it, building it, driving it. The input was energy. And so when the price of energy goes up, the price of everything goes up, as we've experienced in the last couple of years. When the price of energy goes down, the price of everything goes down, and productivity can skyrocket. Again, back to our industrial revolution conversation this morning. It was a revolution because of the 400x multiplier on productivity these engines unlocked, and the whole world changed. And that's the ratio that we're hunting for. What's the next one, right? What's next in the energy game? And if this is it, countries can't afford to be on the sidelines. But the next question is, obviously, we can build them, and that's that. But how do you fuel them? Because uranium is the fuel, right? Pretty strategic resource, comes from a few places, not a ton. So walk us through the supply side. We've covered the demand to a new extent. What does the supply side of the uranium sector look like, Amir?
I don't know where Rick Rule was on this stage on the last talk. And I think, when I was getting going in this business, guys like Rick Rule, guys like Bob Bishop, if you spoke to them, they would tell you, look, man, the commodity game is a cyclical business. You'll have some good years, you'll have some bad years. Any resource investor here knows that, right? The thing we got to understand about the uranium market and why we're in so much trouble today with a supply deficit is that over the last 20 years, we had cumulative 18 bad years and 2 good years. And that creates and exasperates a supply-side problem that is unusual. It's unusual because if this was the gold sector and the copper sector and the commodity price had gone up 400%, the supply side would have expanded rapidly. We just had that happen in uranium. The commodity price went up 400% in 4 years, and the supply side increased by 20%. Mm-hmm. So we still have a deficit. So what does that tell you? Simple commodity game. That means the price of the commodity is not high enough. It's not incentivizing new supply side growth. And so all we've seen happen in the uranium sector here over the last few years is market has improved. We've moved slightly above marginal cost of production, but this year, uranium mines will only supply 75% of demand. So there's 25% of demand is uncovered. And the fact that we're not incentivizing new uranium mines simply means the commodity price isn't high enough. And when we look at the uranium price of $75 a pound, the reason why I think this is the most compelling investment opportunity in front of us is, besides the macro situation that we talked about, most commodities out there today are in an oversupplied situation. Oil is oversupplied. Lithium is oversupplied. Copper is so-so. Uranium is in a serious supply deficit today, but that's because we had a 12-year bear market. And I've had many investors who have come to the booth, you know who you are, that have said, hey man, we stuck with this for uranium investing for the last decade, it's finally working. Those guys, those people know it's been tough. We're seeing the other side of an 11-year bear market. However, the world's a very challenging place. We have a lot of geopolitical tension out there. You've seen in the US, they've banned Russian uranium imports. And so it's not just about increasing the supply of uranium, but it's increasing it in safe, stable jurisdictions. US, places like obviously our own Canada with Athabasca Basin. But here's the one thing. When I say uranium supplies are only meeting 75% of demand, that's this year's demand. Next year, uranium demand is going up because as we speak, there are 65 reactors under construction. And we haven't even started talking about small and advanced modular reactors. Small and advanced modular reactors are additional source of demand that maybe not next year, but within the next 3 to 4 years can become a reality. And there are big players backing those, again, like the big tech giants that we talked about. So this is an exasperated supply side, and I think it's one of the most compelling I have ever seen for any commodity out there.
So I just want to spend a minute on the SMR technology, the small modular reactors that you just mentioned, because
you like those ones.
can you tell? I keep asking you about it backstage. But here's the case that gets me excited is that, you know, so much of the cost of a traditional nuclear reactor is in the necessity for pressure, right? The intense amounts of cement and steel that are required to contain water at that pressure, prevent it from boiling at that temperature. The SMRs operate at atmospheric pressure. And so many of the materials that go into a plant, they're reduced by about 70%. And if I understand sort of the investment in a nuclear facility, that's reduced by about 60% with an SMR. Getting back to the new thing is more cost effective than the current thing. Is the energy output per dollar that much greater in an SMR? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, and I think, look, the big issue is everyone in the room knows this, right? So let's level set about the challenges with nuclear energy, right? One of the biggest challenges with nuclear energy is managing the spent fuel. And that's always been almost a handicap for the commodity. The other thing is the big CapEx, upfront capital requirements to build these reactors. What's so promising about SMRs, in addition to the points you mentioned, is the fact that they're designed to reduce and better manage the spent fuel, and the upfront capital requirements are not just significantly less, but they're bite size. If you're going to build a gigawatt reactor versus a 100 megawatt reactor, you're proportionately less, and SMRs are basically built in a warehouse, a manufacturing site, and installed at site. It's a very different construction value proposition. So this could be a game changer, but I encourage you all, if you want to understand how serious the US Department of Energy on a bipartisan basis is about this issue of SMRs, write this down. Google, don't ChatGPT this because it'll take 100 times more energy. Google, restoring America's competitive advantage in nuclear energy. It's a study that came out by the Department of Energy 5 years ago. And it basically said, the US has lost its global competitive advantage to China and India when it comes to nuclear energy, and it must regain it by, list the 3 things: taking the lead in SMRs, rebuilding the fuel cycle, that means uranium conversion enrichment, and establishing the strategic uranium reserve, which is the US government's stockpile of uranium that started a year ago.
Just one more time, the name of the article?
Restoring America's Global Competitiveness in Nuclear Energy. Department of Energy. Put that whole thing in there.
All right, I saw a bunch of people taking notes. Amir, thank you for joining me on stage today. If you want to chat more with Amir, he'll be on the floor. He's in a booth with Uranium Energy Corp and Uranium Royalty Corp. Do you know what booth number you are?
626.
He's out
626.
there.
626, right outside there.
Yeah,
626. Be delighted to speak to you all. Jay, you're doing a kick-ass job. How about on behalf of everyone, big round of applause for this, guys. Come on. What a show.
I appreciate that. Amir, thank you so much.